Okay, here we go. Hello, everybody. I'm so pleased to be joined by Nicky White, who is a SENCO at one of our Surrey schools. And I'm going to start straight away by saying, hi, Nicky, thank you very much for joining us. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about you and your school.
Hello, everybody, and it's a real pleasure to be talking to you from my lounge, actually, today. I'm in school for 4 days a week and have the privilege of working from home on a Monday, so that's really, really nice. So I'm the SENCO of a 3-form entry school, infant school in Reigate, and we also have a high needs communication and interaction needs centre, commonly known as COINS, and that provides a setting for 16 children from the ages of 4 to 7, all of whom have an education, health and care plan. The majority have a diagnosis of autism, but not exclusively. And then within our mainstream school, we currently have 8 children who have got an education, health and care plan, and about 40 children who are on the special needs code of practice at special educational needs support.
Lovely, thank you. That sounds like you're rather busy. We were so pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you, and we spoke to our members through our Facebook groups and asked what questions there was really, if you could ask a primary SENCO some questions, what would they be? So I've got some questions for you and I shall go straight in. I haven't ordered them in any strategic way, so we might be dotting about a little bit. The first one it was repeated in a number of different ways, is how do you deliver a differentiated curriculum for a child with special educational needs or disabilities?
So the starting point has always got to be the individual child, and everything we do is with the child at the centre of that. So for us, that means that we really know our children. And by that, I mean we know their barriers to learning, we know what makes them tick, what might motivate them. And then from that, what we can then do is start to really look at how we need to deliver the curriculum. And my little mantra is that we make it simple, but not easy. So that could be that you're looking at some work that you're wanting a child to do, and you've got in your mind when you're planning what those barriers to learning are. So it could be that it's just simplified right down. It could be that additional scaffolding is going in either from a teacher or a TA. It could be that we're looking at where that child would best be placed to carry out an activity, whether they need to go into a quiet space away from the hustle and bustle. So we're looking, the barriers to learning, I think, are really important, and teachers who know what those barriers are can then look at the activities in the planning stage and think about what they need to put in place in order for that child to be successful. And for me, it's not about necessarily having a TA Velcro to the side of a child, because we're wanting them to be able to work and learn independently. And in order to do that, you've got to get the pitch of the activity right. And it goes back to all our, we call it first quality teaching. So really thinking about what do we need to put in place to make that learning successful. And increasingly we're using IT to support some children, not all the time, because again, we don't want them to be in front of a screen all the time, but for some children, that's a huge advantage and really helps them to hook in and to access learning. And I think it's something we do really well, looking at that, looking at the planning, thinking, right, how do I make this simple, not easy, because we've still got to have those really high expectations of where these children are going to get to and the progress they're going to make. So yes, it's at the planning stage, I guess, in a nutshell, knowing the children. I think that's fundamental. And if you don't know them, you're not going to get it right for them.
I think that will resonate really well, I think, with most parents, if not all of us. And it sounds as though you're doing this very much as part of the class rather than thinking of that child separately.
Yeah, and because, and I don't mean this disparagingly at all to teaching assistants, they are amazing and we couldn't do our jobs as well as we do without them. But it's absolutely crucial that children with special needs have access to teachers. We've done the training, we've had 4 years, you know, and all the experience. And so we try and teach in the classroom with them accessing learning that the rest of the class are doing at their appropriate level with all the appropriate scaffolding in place, but being taught by a teacher.
That sounds really wonderful.
The teaching assistant is there to facilitate. It could be that they're there sort of helping to maintain focus and attention, but not there all the time, sort of coming and going maybe and making sure that they're on track. And is there anything else that we need to address misunderstandings, that sort of thing. But it's got to be, the work is pitched at a level that that child can do as much as possible independently, because you've got it right and you've got those next steps in learning really clear for them as much as the rest of the class who are learning at different levels as well.
That sounds lovely. Fab. The next question that we had was, what training, time and resources do you have to do the job of SENCO?
Oh, so my training, obviously I'm a qualified teacher. I've also done postgraduate diplomas in teaching children with autism and severe learning difficulties. I have a certificate for teaching children with specific learning difficulties. So those are my formal additional training, and then loads and loads of CPD, either from Surrey or additional bodies. So I've got a lot of experience and a lot of formal training behind me. Time is an interesting one. So I'm also a deputy head and I'm teacher in charge of our High Coin Centre, and I teach currently for 2.5 days a week, and then I have 2.5 days to do my other roles. So it's a little bit of a juggling act, I have to say, but certain times of the year are busier than others. So annual reviews, for example, at the moment are taking up a lot of my time. And out of that 2.5 days when I'm not in the classroom, I try and dedicate 1 day to being in the classroom, working alongside teachers and children, supporting them, delivering the high quality teaching that I spoke about earlier. What was the other bit to the question? It was
resources, which I suppose fits into the time, but maybe there's more to it than that.
Resources. We're going to train an assistant SENCO from September because my job is just becoming unmanageable, really. And then resources, we've got a lot of TAs at school. We've got about 30, which is a huge resource, and they're amazing. And we do that because we believe in early intervention. So we get as much support in for the children as we can. And we're really well resourced in terms of equipment and resources that we can use to support children. And we have a speech and language therapist who works with us for 2 days a week. And we've got 4 ELSAs. So we have 1 ELSA for each year group, including the centre. So yes,
that's really
a lot going on.
That is an awful lot, isn't it? And what you're describing is a really complex picture that you're having to juggle, which I think I remember when I was a parent of little ones, I wouldn't have had the first idea of how all of this kind of knits together. And I'm really interested about the fact that you were mentioning that as a school you decided to employ a speech and language therapist,
Yeah.
To support that early intervention, which is,
Yeah.
is really interesting. One of the things that it kind of followed on from that question was a lot of parents were asking, as a SENCO, do you have legal training of the code of practice and all of the legislation around SEND, or is that something that you find you do on your own time as a way? We wondered how ordinary is it for SENCOs to have that kind of training?
I haven't had any legal training on the code of practice. I've read it quite a number of times, and it's really quite explicit in there what our legal requirements are. And if I have a query, my first port of call would be to our case officer. So now, and that's much improved actually now from Surrey, because we now have case officers attached to a school, whereas previously the case officers were attached to different children. So it could be that you were working with a number of different case officers. But now I have one port of call and I can go to her if I have any queries regarding the legalities around the code of practice. But I think it's quite clear. I've not had any problems with that.
Great, that's really good to know. Thank you. So you were talking about early intervention, and I know we talk a lot about that in our work with Family Voice with Surrey as well. One of the things that comes up again and again from our members is, how do you identify and then support the SEND needs of children who are academically doing really well or who are quiet in school? The fine in school child.
Yes, I think that is a real difficult area actually, and I think that's where our relationship with parents is so important, because absolutely I can think of a couple of children that we've currently got who appear fine in school and they're doing really, really well academically. They're on track to achieve age-related expectations. We know that some of them, and they're both girls actually, both have a diagnosis of autism, and they're quiet and they find that social interaction difficult, but they appear to be okay. Parents, however, tell us a very different story about what these little ones are like when they get home, and the anxiety that they're presenting at home from arising from school. And we're not seeing it because they're holding it together at school, and they're conforming to the norms and the expectations, and that's important to them. So for me, it's that relationship with parents then that is key, and it's around discussing what is happening at home, because often they can get more information than we can. So for these children, we're really mindful of their environment. We let them know there's a place that they can go to, there are people that they can go to, supported with visuals if they need it. If they don't feel that they can say, then they've got special cards. We work closely with the speech and language therapist then as well, looking at ways that we can support that social emotional development for them. And often it's around social communication and their development of their understanding of theirs and others' emotions and what all of that means. We'll use our ELSAs to give children that time, those individuals that perhaps are masking their anxieties, so we give time for that. And we also have 2 therapists who are trained in drawing and talking if we really feel that they need something more intensive and slightly more focused, then we can use that time as well. So it goes back again to this knowing the child and all members of staff working with that child being alert to slight changes in behaviour that may be suggesting that they're struggling even though academically they're doing really well and they appear to be okay on the outside. Yeah, and it's a struggle because, and then again, I think for parents, sometimes they feel that we may not believe them, that this is how their child is at home, because we're saying, well, they're fine, honestly, they're fine. And we're saying they're fine to hope that that reassures them that they're on track. But we always, I'm a parent, I know that my children, although they're 29 now, you know, can behave in one situation and then very differently in another. So it's that dialogue again with parents. And
it's difficult, isn't it? Because I can hear that I'm trying to reassure you, and I know, having experienced this as a parent, although you hear that, you also think, but you don't understand, you don't realise how bad this is.
Yeah, absolutely. And you really don't know that my little one had a meltdown and was throwing things and shouting and just displaying anxiety at home. And I know you're saying to me they sit quietly and they're absolutely wonderful and gorgeous, but they're really quite challenging at home, and we need support with that. So we do as much as we possibly can. We have a homeschool link worker as well that we can use to provide that link.
This feels to me like it ties in a lot, because it sounds like you've got a really lovely relationship with your families, which it is, I think you're right, is key to an awful lot of this. One of the big worries I think the parents have with any child with SEND, and possibly with those kind of more hidden cases in particular, is the worry of the future and what will happen when we leave this place that feels as safe as we can be. So the other question that came up a lot was, how do you manage transitions? And initially from kind of preschool into, but then you're transitioning into primary school, aren't you?
Yes.
And I suppose it's how you can reassure families like these that we've been talking about, that that child's needs are still going to be recognised. And it comes back to that identification, doesn't it? If you don't have that solid piece of paper that says this child has a SEND, how do you make sure the continuity is happening? But I'm really interested to know about how you manage that whole transition, picking up children and then sending them on their way on their next day.
So obviously things are a bit different this year in terms of transition. So if I talk first about children coming in from nurseries into us, so actually in about half an hour I'm going back into school, and we're going to record a video virtual tour of the school, and we're going to have our own YouTube channel. So we're going to be YouTube stars. So we're going to have that'll go up. The teachers are all reading a story that's going to go onto that YouTube channel, and we've got all of the teaching assistants for each class saying hello, and so they've got that, because
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I'm mum to 2 children on the autistic spectrum, and I can see myself back, 15 years ago, thinking actually that in a normal setting would have been so lovely to be able to refer to almost throughout the year, to remind them of that link between school and that familiarity. So it sounds like a wonderful resource.
So the children also have a photo book, all of them, whether they're in the centre or in mainstream. So they have a photo book that shows their members of staff in their classes, the key parts of the school. So that's something that parents then can refer to throughout the holidays particularly. Usually we would have our little ones coming in and they do a stay and play, and we provide them with activity packs with books and colouring and pencils and all sorts of different things, and they can then come in and change these packs and have a little walk around the school. And they can come in for a lunch usually. Obviously that's not happening this year. So we've got a really robust transition from nursery into school. And for those children perhaps on a plan, I will go and attend the annual review if I possibly can. So we've got that sort of link as well. And mainstream teachers talk to nursery schools. So we've got lots and lots of information that comes our way.
I'm interested, how often do you find that you get a child from nursery and in the first few weeks you recognise that there is a SEN need that hasn't been identified at preschool?
It does happen. It does happen. And for those children perhaps who you can see that they need a plan, and then we've got that task of gathering evidence, because we've got to have 2 terms worth of information before we can apply for a plan. So if perhaps there have been things missed, then that can cause a bit of a problem and a delay. But nursery staff, you know, again, they're amazing, but sometimes that support isn't there for them. And I think that is something that needs to be looked at, that sort of outreach and support into nurseries. So we had a couple that came in last year that desperately needed plans, and I've only just managed to get those in because we didn't have that information. We still support. We will always give the support, but it's the funding that then is lacking. And then from us into juniors, our mainstream teachers speak to the receiving schools, quite in-depth transition meetings where each child is discussed. So the individual difficulties that a child may be having are really passed on in a lot of detail. And again, for children in the centre and those who've got plans in year 2, we always invite the receiving school to the annual review. So there's an awful lot of information sharing that goes on. And we send up all the individual support plans that we have, any relevant information, reports from professionals. So I think that works really well, actually, and parents should be reassured, I think, that information is shared and really, as I say, in a lot of detail.
So my head is fizzing, and I'm really sorry because I know I've given you some questions to prepare because it would be totally unfair to just throw stuff at you. But I'm really interested by what you were describing, and I wonder if you had, for example, a student who's moved up into year 3 and a need has arisen then, and that junior school came back to you. Would there be scope for an exercise where you might relook at your experience with that child and say, oh, well, actually, maybe there was something that we missed. This is what we were doing, or is that the kind of dialogue that you might be able to have with one of the junior schools?
Yeah, definitely. And often, particularly around, for example, dyslexia, it could be because generally they're not diagnosed, or that difficulty isn't diagnosed until 7, really.
Yeah.
So absolutely, within the local schools, we'd happily have that conversation and
with that, because I appreciate that presumably this, if they felt that a child needed a plan, they have that same 2-term need for evidence. Could they get evidence from you to help?
Yeah. So if we're passing up, for example, it could be that I might be saying, actually, I think you're going to need to go for a plan.
Yeah.
Here are all the individual support plans that we had in place for this child. This is all the evidence that we've got, and that can then be submitted and used by the receiving school. So they may not have to physically themselves get 2 terms notes worth of evidence if we provided them with some already.
Lovely. That sounds really good. Thank you. What I've got, I think I'm on to 3 more questions. This came up a lot. What support is available to help children with concentration? I love this, given that you're dealing with 4 to 7-year-olds.
Yeah, and I think although a lot of the children with special needs, well, all of them are very, very different.
Yeah.
One probable thing that they all have in common is difficulties with listening and attention. So again, it goes back to knowing what makes them tick. and what motivates them and what engages them. Because if they're engaged in a task, as we all know with little ones, they can sustain their concentration for sustained periods of time. So we look very carefully at the planning. You know, is it achievable for them? And it could be that we need to modify the environment. So for some, they may need to have their own workstation, or we've got portable screens that they can put around where they're working. High expectations too of what they're expected to do, and that could be using some sort of a schedule. So they may have a visual one for the little ones where they tick off, you know, what they've done, and or some of the older ones would have that written. So it could be, right, you're going to write the date, or get your book, write the date, write one sentence. And so different strategies to help keep them on track and to keep them focused.
And actually that kind of breaking down sounds like you're supporting their executive function.
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. Because for some of those children, holding everything in their heads is really, really difficult. They can do one thing, possibly process one thing at a time. And if it's there and it's broken down for them, then they can be really successful and achieve what we want them to achieve and what they should be achieving. So yes, we've got it's an ongoing battle with them, and that's where teaching assistants can be quite helpful, in that just walk past them and just go and just point and redirect. So yeah.
Two broader kind of bigger picture questions that I've got to finish off. How do you share good practice or concerns, either with other schools or with Surrey County Council? So that I'm hearing, it's so lovely to speak to you because you clearly have an absolutely wonderful school. And I've heard from parents of your school how much they love it there and your support. And of course, other schools, other parents have different experiences. So we'd like to be, I suppose, supportive of sharing that good practice and also any issues. And I wondered how that works from a school perspective.
We're part of a multi-academy trust, and within that we have a SENCO network, if you like. So we do get together regularly and share good practice in that way. And we're also part of another network of schools, again, where the SENCOs are linked, and we share good practice in that way. And I guess those are the formal routes that we have. I have done outreach in the past and gone into schools to support them with children, mainly on the autistic spectrum, in putting strategies in place. Yeah, so teachers like to talk, really, and we do like to share. So we do that quite often. But I haven't done anything county-wide.
Right, and do you have any opportunities to share any good stories with Surrey County Council or the SEN teams, or not very easily?
No, we haven't. No. No, we tend to, I suppose our communication with Surrey tends to be, we need you to support us, and it's a little bit, it needs to shift. I think it's a really good point. It would be lovely to be sharing with them rather than just hounding them for.
I think it, yeah, and I suspect it would be very well received, actually, particularly examples of where things are working really well.
Yeah.
So thank you. Last question. We spoke about this just in our little introductory chat. At the moment, we're stuck in this very strange kind of, some kids are at school, most are not. And in the SEND world, one really big concern amongst families has been the fact that the legislation has been shifted. I'm trying to use non-contentious words, but such that local authorities and schools are asked to make reasonable endeavours rather than provide everything in the EHCPs. And I wondered, as a school, how you've been managing that.
So we've got a tiered priority system for entry of our children back into school. So our tier 1 were our vulnerable children, including those with education, health and care plans, children on pupil premium, and children with special needs and key workers. So we invited all of our children back with an education, health and care plan, because we just knew that we needed to have them in if parents wanted that. Not all parents have chosen to send those children back in. And so for those who are still continuing to work from home, we're providing email, telephone support, and we're also dropping packages of work off to them so that we can have a face-to-face conversation with them on a weekly basis. And that seems to be going down, you know, really well. And then our children with special needs on special education needs support, again, they were a priority in terms of entry. And again, continuing to provide that email and telephone support for those parents who've chosen to keep them at home. And that's how we're managing it. And I think, as I say, it's working really well. And I think parents feel supported if they are still at home. Very, very difficult times. But I have to say to parents, I think you've all done an amazing, amazing job. The little ones that we've had come back in, we've just been blown away by the progress that they've made. You can really see that they've done so well. And I think it's going to be really interesting to have that conversation with parents as we move into whatever the new normal will be, because parents will have this wealth of information about what worked for their child at home, doing home learning, and they'll have had an insight that we perhaps wouldn't have seen. And I'm really keen to have that conversation with parents to find out what worked and equally what didn't work for them.
That's really good to hear. How have you managed to maintain some kind of the therapy side of provision, things like speech and language?
Yeah, so speech and language continue to support either through email, phone visits, phone calls rather. Yes, so our speech and language therapy, both our own private one, but also the therapists from Surrey have continued to provide that support.
Great, that's really good to hear. Thank you so much, Nicky. I've got to the end of my questions. It's been an absolute joy to meet you and to talk to you, and I know that all of our parents are going to be absolutely thrilled to hear you, so thank you so much.
You're very welcome, and good luck to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.